Hello there. My name is Anita, and this is going to be a slightly different video. Um, One of the things I talked about when I started this channel was wanting to talk about theology as part of the journey of being transgender. And so this is really a video along those lines, um, and talking about how I reconcile being transgender with my Christian faith. And so it'll be from a very Christian theological perspective. This is not to say that I think other religions are not valid or can bring you to God. It's just that this is my background, and so therefore this is what I can talk about. So anyway, let me get started. I was watching another video by a young man named Austn Hartke. His channel is Austn Lionheart, and I will make a link to his channel in the description below and to the video that I was watching in the description below, in which he was talking about whether being transgender was a mistake that God had made. And he was basically answering a complaint or a criticism that I've heard from other people, saying that God doesn't make mistakes, and which sort of implies that somehow I'm a mistake. And the idea being that you can't be transgender because God doesn't make mistakes is really what the argument is. And he gives a refutation of that, which I think is very good, but it's from a very different theological perspective than where I come from. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to sort of talk about the differences between what his approach is and what my approach might be. And so, or is actually. And so he really sort of talks about, and you can go see the video yourself because I think it'd be a good thing to do, but he talks about that our bodies, God intended me to be transgender. And I have a problem with that, and I want to talk about why I've got a problem with that. Years ago, I had Crohn's disease, and it very nearly killed me. And one of the things I came to a decision about in that period of time was that God did not intend for me to have Crohn's disease. This was not part of God's plan for my life. Just like God doesn't plan for children to get cancer. And so what I had to do was really grapple with the idea that somehow God is this super being that's up in some place, reigning on heaven on high, I think is the way it's generally put in song. And that he controls everything. Everything unfolds according to God's plan. And of course, I can't say that that's wrong. Nobody really knows. But for me, it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. And I want to talk a little bit about why that doesn't make any sense. And a lot of my thinking, as I currently am, got started about 16 or 17 years ago when a friend of mine who was theologically trained, and he and I would get into these conversations about God and about theology and about the world. And he'd come upon an idea, and he just threw it out to me, and he said, what if we look at God as a verb? And I started thinking about that, trying to figure out how you would look at God as a verb. And so oddly enough, I almost immediately after that ran into a book at this wonderful little bookstore that's closed, unfortunately, called God as a Verb. And it is written about the Jewish Kabbalah. And it was a very interesting book. It really helped me sort of grapple with this concept of God as a verb. God is something that's acting. God is an action rather than a being in the sense that we are. And since that point in time, and part of this grows out of the fact that I am mathematically trained. I have a master's degree in mathematics. And I'm very used to thinking about processes, stochastic processes, or function spaces. And a function is essentially a process. It's just it's working at combining this value with this value, and basically. But you start thinking about it in terms of that way. And then I ran into process theology, which was started by Alfred, well, not started, but it works on the basis of the thinking of Alfred North Whitehead, who was a mathematician. He wrote Mathematica, now I've forgotten the name of it, Principia Mathematica with Bertrand Russell. I think that's right. I'm getting old and I'm forgetting these little details, so pardon me if that's wrong. Don't get on my nerves, or don't get on my case. Sorry, you can get on my nerves. Anyway, but it was something that's very natural to me, and I've been thinking more and more about God as process. Then I ran into a book by Catherine Keller, Dr. Catherine Keller, who comes out of the process theological school. Specifically, she sort of harkens back to John Cobb and in his work, and he harkens back to Alfred North Whitehead. And so she talks about God really more as an open-ended process. This process that doesn't have a fixed end, that it's creative, that it's relational, that it calls and responds. She talks about creation as a call and response. And I believe I talked about this in another video, and I'll link it somewhere, probably here or here. I get confused. It always shows up sort of in a mirror image on me, and I can't ever remember which side is the right side. Well, I know which side is my right side, but I don't remember where the thing will come. Anyway, she talks about God is sort of really an open-ended process, and I really like that idea. And so when I bring that back then to talking about being transgender, you look at the whole process of human development, what's going on. We don't really understand all the things that are happening. There's a growing understanding that biological sex and gender identity are formed at different parts and different times of the development in the uterus. It may have a lot to do with just what hormones are available at the time, and subtle changes, and whether they meet a certain threshold or they don't meet the threshold, we don't really know. And so you can't sort of go back and say, well, it's definitely this. But there's a sense that being transgender comes out of the process of developing in the womb. And as somebody who's transgender, that is enormously, for me now, that is enormously helpful. I can say God didn't intend, God being this open-ended process that is calling into a loving creation, a relational creation. Basically, I look at it as an unfolding of relational space that allows us to love one another, to help one another, to be open to one another, to be vulnerable to one another, in the same way that God has been vulnerable to us. And I'll talk about that. I think that's a good topic for another video, is the vulnerability of being transgender and what it says about our relationship with God. But in that, it is then a statement to me that, okay, this is what happened. It's neither good nor bad. It's not good or evil. It's not going to get you to heaven or send you to hell. But it is going to be something that is given to you as part of this creative process of God, intended or not, because it's an open-ended process. And so, therefore, I am called to respond in a creative and loving way. To me, that is a more interesting and a more opening response than the more traditional theological approach that starts with the idea that somehow God is in control of everything. Um, and so I don't want to go talking on and on and on about this. So I'm going to stop here. But I hope you find this approach at least something to consider or helpful. Again, what I said in an earlier video was if your theology is getting in your way of being able to approach God, of being able to be affirming of God, to be able to feel affirmed by God as a transgender person or as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, then change your theology. Nobody can say your theology is wrong. They can disagree with it. But I think theology becomes our way of approaching the divine and being able to contemplate really the mystery of the divine, because it's not something any of us really understand. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you like this video. I hope you find it helpful. Please subscribe to my channel if you get a chance, or if you haven't already, so that you get updates. I'm not updating on a regular basis. I think the beautiful image of me pops up over here someplace, or I can put it over here. And then I'm going to start a new playlist, and I'll do a link, and hopefully it'll be over in this area. So thank you very much for watching, and good day.